The boy lived a simple, somewhat impoverished life. His childhood was filled with difficulties. His father left almost immediately after his son's birth, so the woman had to raise her child practically alone, combining parental duties with work at the meatpacking plant. His mother always told him that he was special, but he never understood why, what made him different from other children. Therefore, Beto got used to thinking that his specialness was his lack of intelligence. School was challenging for him. Roberto lagged far behind his classmates in grades when it came to literature, social studies, and other humanities subjects, and other children often teased him because of this. He often felt inferior or stupid. So, receiving another poor grade for his dictation, he just lowered his head, realizing that once again he had failed to please his mother. Meanwhile, his classmates rejoiced in his failures. Children always operate on an us versus them system, following which they can become quite cruel. And Roberto's lot was to be the punching bag. Failed again, huh? Francisco smirked loudly, snatching his classmate's essay from his hands. How can you not know your own language? You're just dumb, Beto. Roberto shyly hunched his shoulders. He never argued or caused a scene. Only occasionally could he rudely respond to his tormentors, but he did so only in extreme cases. I don't judge your grades, the boy replied in a low voice. Why do you have to be like this with me? Francisco chuckled in amusement. He enjoyed watching the feeble attempts of his dim-witted classmate to stand up for himself. He was just a child and didn't understand why bullying others was wrong. The truth about bullies only dawns on them many years after growing up, if ever. But there were also children who subconsciously felt that all this was wrong. The boy from the third row belonged to this type. Hey, Pancho, leave him alone, Alejandro suddenly interjected into the conversation, wrinkling his nose. He's just sitting there, not bothering anyone. So what if he failed? What's it to you? You have some fixation on other people's mistakes. Francisco snorted discontentedly. He didn't like arguing with Sandro. With contempt, the bully considered him a pathetic nerd who, during verbal disputes, appealed to words whose meanings Pancho often didn't know. The troublemaker didn't want the class's attention to shift from the failure Beto to the small vocabulary of Alejandro. Beat up Alejandro after school, don't beat him up, he'll still stick to his line. Maybe the nerd inherited such an unbending character from his father, who was once a soldier and now was a disabled person. The man lost a leg but still engaged in amateur football and led a very active lifestyle. Sandro didn't talk much about him. But the kid still thought his father was cool. Perhaps Dad was also the reason why Alejandro couldn't just watch Beto being bullied. Thanks, Roberto whispered with his lips, looking at his pensive classmate. He barely managed to finish school, and it was a great achievement for him. He often doubted himself and his abilities, saw no dreams of a bright future. But inside him lived a spark of hope and a desire to change something in his life. From the moment Roberto was born, his mother knew that she would have to put in a lot of effort to give her child a chance to go to college. She started saving money for her son's education as soon as she returned from maternity leave. The baby had to be left with his grandmother. At that time, the woman was living her first years after divorcing her unloved husband. She wanted to spend time in her own company rather than with diapers and baby bottles. But the old lady understood that otherwise no one would take care of Beto, no one would help her daughter. When do you have time off, Sarah? The elderly woman asked right from the threshold, carefully taking her grandson from her daughter's arms. I've saved up a sum. I wanted to go to Tibet this summer. My trip depends on you. Mom, you know yourself, she guiltily lowered her gaze to the floor. If I take time off, they won't pay me for it. We'll be really tight on money. The woman sighed heavily. She wanted to start living for herself. Throughout her youth, the grandmother had spent her time raising her daughter, and then part of her adult life was spent trying to save her marriage to a man she had stopped loving long ago. Sarah worked herself to exhaustion, often taking extra shifts, never refusing to cover for a coworker. Her daughter did everything for her child. Maria simply had no choice but to give up her desired trip to Tibet. Being a single mother, she already didn't sleep on her only weekends when she looked after little Beto. It would be inhumane to make her figure out a solution. Maria closed the door behind her daughter and looked at her grandson. He reached out his little pink hands to her and smiled at her with a toothless mouth. "Well, little one," the grandmother said with a hint of sadness, affectionately looking at the child, "I guess I'll have to stay home for now." Although the mother had to closely monitor every penny in her wallet, she did everything possible to provide her son with an education. She tried to cut expenses to a minimum, giving up luxurious purchases and entertainment, preferring to invest in her child's future. When it came time to choose a profession, her son decided to follow his passion for cars. He had always been fascinated by technology, and it was clear to him that he wanted to pursue a career in automobiles. His mother couldn't secure him a spot in some prestigious field, but Roberto didn't need that. He clearly told his mother that he wanted to be an auto mechanic. Her son, who had previously struggled in school and didn't always feel confident in a typical school environment, discovered new abilities and talents in himself when he began college. Working with machinery and cars seemed extremely exciting to him. Moreover, the hands-on experience in practical classes gave him more satisfaction than endless hours of memorization. And when it came to written work, Roberto always excelled in exact sciences. For his mother, it was a true relief. She had always worried about her son's future, seeing how difficult schooling was for him. However, witnessing her son thrive in a new environment filled her with joy and pride. Her son had found his calling, giving her confidence that he would find his place in life and succeed in his chosen profession. Sarah finally felt like she had done everything right. And Maria shared in her happiness. After so many years, she had finally broken free from the apartment that had become a prison to her. The woman continued to explore the amazing world that had been inaccessible to her for so long. It all started with Tibet. Then came India, Turkey, Bangladesh. She even managed to find remote work. Years of teaching mathematics hadn't gone to waste, and during her travels, she still found time to give children online lessons. In a way, the grandmother became more progressive than her daughter. Amidst work and travels, Maria never forgot to keep in touch with her family. And each call brought her nothing but pure joy. She knew that both Sarah and Roberto were doing just fine without her. Only some difficulties Roberto faced in communicating with peers brought a slight touch of sadness to the elderly lady's busy days. The young man stood out from his classmates not only in his ability to work with machines, but also in his manner of communication. His kindness, calmness, and willingness to help others caught the attention of teachers, who valued him as an excellent student and a good person. However, not all of his peers were understanding. Roberto was still a stranger to them. Naivety, simple-mindedness, poor speech, and a lack of interest in trends made it difficult for him to communicate with young people. Despite his interesting field of study, Beto still couldn't say he felt completely happy. Loneliness still overwhelmed him at times. But soon Alonso appeared. He studied in a different faculty. Getting into the same field as Alonso seemed impossible for people from simple families. Only the best applicants were admitted there. Roberto met him by chance. Roberto was heading to class when he suddenly saw a parked car on the side of the road. The hood was up, and an unfamiliar young man was looking underneath it with bewilderment. Beto couldn't just pass by the opportunity to try fixing a real car, not just the models in classrooms. "Hey!" the big-hearted fellow timidly greeted, fiddling his fingers out of awkwardness. "Hey! Listen, are you from around here? Do you know where the nearest service station is?" The troubled guy started right away. "My phone died. I can't even call for a tow truck. I have no idea what to do." Roberto approached the car step by step. The stranger raised an eyebrow, realizing that answers weren't going to come quickly. "Hey, buddy. What are you doing?" "Auto mechanic. Second year." Buddy," Roberto turned to the car owner and smiled, "I live far from here. I don't know where the service station is. Can I take a look?" "You're just a second-year student. What will you find there?" Well, I still don't know where the service station is. I can only take a look. Roberto, without waiting for permission, leaned against the car and started peering inside. Why did you stop? The guy rubbed his neck. He immediately understood that this mechanic was strange, so he decided not to stop him. In a way, he was right. Not knowing where the service station was, he couldn't help the hapless driver with anything else. Well, the car was jerking a lot. The RPM was jumping. I couldn't get up to speed properly. He approached the guy, whom he had seen many times in the university corridors. Then I stopped to check. Maybe there was a problem with the tires. I don't know. I only know how to drive a car, okay? And then I couldn't start the engine at all. Roberto glanced into the depths of the engine for a couple of seconds. When the car owner finished speaking, he raised his head and pointed to a particular part. The fuel pump. Immediately after that, the young man unscrewed a couple of elements and showed the owner something dirty, smeared in a black substance. The filter is clogged. The RPMs are dropping. There's no pressure. And what does that mean? It overheated. And you haven't been refueling the tank often. The pump wasn't fully submerged. It overheated, picked up sediment from the bottom of the tank. The fuel pump got clogged, tired, started breaking down. It needs to be replaced. Without pressure, it's dangerous. It'll stutter, the car will stall. Oh well. I'm not an expert, but this thing really looks too dirty? I don't think it should be like this, the car enthusiast shrugged. But I don't have a phone, I can't do anything with the car, you know? Roberto reached into the pocket of his worn jeans, pulling out a basic button phone, which made the interlocutor raise his eyebrows in surprise. Make a call. Thanks, you're really saving me. The guy accepted the strange means of communication, then extended his hand to the mechanic. I'm Alonso. Information Security, 2nd year. I'm Roberto. Automotive Mechanics, 2nd year. This guy, the son of a local businessman, was touched by such help from a completely unfamiliar person. Yes, in the end, they turned out to be classmates, but can you really expect help from someone you don't even greet in the hallway? Alonso was more impressed by the simplicity with which his classmate explained the essence of the problem. Short sentences, simple speech. Surprisingly, this made it even clearer. Although they studied in different faculties and had different academic interests, it turned out they still had points of contact. They enjoyed chatting about simple life. About favorite food, about little things that can make a person happy. It was in these moments that Roberto, with his extraordinary simplicity of thought, was indispensable in Alonso's eyes. And he liked the sincere passion of his new friend. For the son of a local car enthusiast, a student of information security, studying in a prestigious field, friendship with a young man who aspired to become a mechanic provided an opportunity to learn about aspects of automotive technology that went beyond his own specialization. Thus, the worlds of rich and poor people collided. On the other hand, for the future mechanic, communication with the wealthy guy provided an opportunity to share his knowledge and passion with someone who perhaps had never thought about car mechanics before. His ability to explain complex things in simple language helped Alonso understand the basic principles and workings of cars. With the help of his only friend, Roberto learned to teach others his skills. In addition to developing professional skills, the young man also learned to communicate. Over the long, lonely school years, he accumulated a great many unspoken words and ideas. He felt genuine delight at every meeting with the businessman's son. Their interaction also emphasized the importance of exchanging knowledge and experience between people with different professional interests. In college, their friendship immediately became noticeable. Everyone, from teachers to ordinary students, watched as the horizons of the two young men expanded with each passing day. Alonso began to understand physical and chemical processes better, his mind sharpened from learning simple everyday things. Roberto began to speak more eloquently and handle computers better. The guys filled in the gaps in each other's knowledge, and it was wonderful. But ahead of them awaited the encounter with each other's families. Their friends deemed this step important. After all, if they influenced each other's lives so profoundly, why should their parents stand aside? Moreover, each of them wanted to introduce their friends to the life they lived at home. Roberto, seeing Alonso's clothing, the car he drove, and the phone he used, clearly understood that he came from a wealthy family. Though Beto's character was gentle, he realized well that the lifestyle of less affluent people might deter the wealthy. At some point, a simple thought struck him: why should he be ashamed of his own life? He had the most loving mother in the world, a roof over his head. Was Alonso a heartless robot unable to comprehend the circumstances in which other people might live? And he was right in his judgments. Alonso felt perfectly at ease, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of hot coffee as a guest of his best friend. Sarah, initially taken aback by such a guest, was bewildered. There was a gleam emanating from the young man. He seemed too perfect to belong in their modest neighborhood. But later, during conversations, the woman's heart rid itself of the shackles of uncertainty. In Alonso's words, she heard Roberto. Thus, she understood that the young man wasn't arrogant or a typical rich boy. He was just as ordinary a person as she was, only living under better conditions. "Aunt Sarah, how did you manage it all?" Alonso asked in surprise upon learning about his friend's childhood. "You were left without a husband, completely alone. And Roberto." He paused, not daring to continue. He didn't want to offend his friend or his mother. He had made the topic of his friend's peculiarities taboo for himself. "I wasn't alone," the woman modestly smiled. "My mom helped me. Until Roberto entered college, she gave up trips and the life she dreamed of." Alonso suddenly became very quiet. He lowered his gaze to the floor, hunched his shoulders, as if he had said something foolish. Watching the boy's reaction, Sarah suddenly burst out laughing. "She's alive. Traveling, just as she wanted. Right now, she's in Italy, decided to see the Colosseum." The boy laughed too, unable to find any words. They often gathered in the kitchen, in a cozy home environment, just to chat. Alonso grew up without a mother, so he missed a mother's touch. He enjoyed Sarah's company. And the woman, in turn, eagerly welcomed the guest with homemade pastries. On days when the young man came to their home in a bad mood, she was always ready to support him. Sometimes, as a woman, she could give him advice on relationships with the opposite sex. Beto was genuinely pleased that warm relations were forming between his mother and his friend. He feared that Al wouldn't understand the life they lived in their modest apartment. But they still feared Alonso's father. No one could predict whether such a successful businessman would oppose such a friendship. But it became harder to go on various outings. His father constantly inquired about who his son spent his days with. Al postponed the moment of introduction, unable to explain to himself why he was so afraid. The owner of car dealerships, noticing his son's progress in learning about cars, was pleasantly surprised by this event and interested in what contributed to such development. So, Alonso had no choice but to tell his father about Roberto. First, he mentioned that Beto was studying to be an auto mechanic. Then, he recounted to the businessman the circumstances under which they had met the kind-hearted fellow. However, he decided to keep quiet about their financial status and peculiarities. Senor Cabrera said he wanted to meet this mysterious young man, at which Alonso sighed heavily and nodded. The invitation for the future mechanic to a men's gathering at the businessman's car dealership was an honor and a unique opportunity for Roberto to enter a world he had previously only seen from the outside. For the businessman, it was a chance to bond with his son. Lately, they hadn't been getting along. Due to Alonso's lack of talent in auto mechanics and other attributes expected of a car dealership owner, there simply hadn't been any common ground between father and son. So, with the help of a secret friend, Senor Cabrera decided to delve a little deeper into his child's life. Arriving at the car dealership, the young men, surrounded by luxurious cars and an atmosphere of elegance, felt a bit out of place. This meeting became an opportunity for all participants to learn something new. "Dad, this is Roberto," he gently pushed his friend forward, "my friend I told you about." Beto awkwardly nodded and extended his broad, calloused hand towards the businessman. The man looked appraisingly at the sturdy lad, expecting something different from his son's friend, Senor Cabrera. Nice to meet you. Likewise, senor. They shook hands, and silence hung between them. Beto, being an unassuming person not burdened by shyness, immediately began looking around. He gazed at one car, then another. A childlike spark of excitement shone in his eyes. Senor, may I take a look? He stared expectantly at Alonso's father, well, thoroughly. From all sides. Under the hood, too. The man chuckled. The young man wasn't timid, and judging by his firm handshake, he indeed spent a lot of time with cars. He made an inviting gesture with his hand and nodded silently, granting the guest permission to start his inspection. The time spent at the car dealership was a true stroke of luck for the future mechanic, an opportunity to get closer to cars he had only seen from afar or in pictures before. The permission to look under the hood of any car in the dealership was like an invitation into a world he had always dreamed of. He looked at each car with curiosity and enthusiasm, unabashedly exploring every corner. To see all the details and mechanisms, he didn't hesitate to lie down on the floor, peering under the chassis. Each car became a coveted object of study for him, an opportunity to deepen his knowledge of elite car brands. It was a unique chance for him not only to examine cars from the inside, but also to feel like a part of this world. The joy and excitement he felt couldn't be hidden. His eyes sparkled, and each new detail under the hood elicited surprise and admiration from him. Well, Roberto, Senor Cabrera interrupted the exploration that the young man had unfolded in a matter of minutes. You are examining everything so avidly, reaching out to everything within reach. Do you have anything to say about my beauties? The enthusiasm and knowledge of the young man impressed the businessman. He attentively listened to the kind-hearted youth's stories about each model, paying attention to details that usually escaped the notice of ordinary car showroom visitors. The young man shared his observations and impressions of the technical characteristics of each car, describing its construction, engine, safety systems, and other important aspects in detail. The businessman was pleasantly surprised by the depth of knowledge and passion with which the young man spoke about cars. His stories proved to be useful and interesting even to those who had worked in the automotive business all their lives. This confirmed that the passion for cars and their technical characteristics was something innate for the young man. The precision and confidence with which Roberto described his impressions of the cars impressed everyone present. He not only detailed the technical specifications and features of each model, but also predicted their behavior on the road, considering numerous factors influencing the driving qualities of the car. And he didn't even need to get behind the wheel or take a test drive for this. His knowledge and experience allowed him to provide recommendations for car care, substantiating them with practical examples and advice. The businessman and his son listened carefully to every word from the kind-hearted youth. They saw in him a potential specialist capable of offering a new perspective on the automotive business and attracting clients with his professionalism and passion for cars. Listen, Alonso, your friend's speech is indeed understandable, the man said, giving the youth a pat on the sturdy shoulder. Son, maybe you're looking for a part-time job? I like the way you reason. Very straightforward, without any embellishments. Your speech is a bit rough at times, but you're still a smart lad. Would you like to be a consultant part-time? The businessman's decision was unexpected but at the same time logical. He understood that a specialist capable of explaining the technical aspects of cars so clearly and understandably could significantly improve the quality of service in his showrooms. Such a consultant could attract new clients and strengthen the company's image as a place where every client receives competent and clear answers to their questions. Of course, Roberto agreed. There was no other option here. Alonso looked at his friend with a certain pride. The danger was behind. His father accepted this friendship. With each passing day, their friendship grew stronger. They often went on men's trips to car races or simply to nature, where they discussed the latest news in the world of cars and shared their experiences with each other. Alonso talked about the development of the IT industry, while Roberto and Senor Cabrera immersed themselves in the world of cars. But after spending a lot of time in Beto's company, now Al could understand what his close ones were talking about and even participate in their conversation. For Beto, the role of a consultant was not just a job, it was his passion. He put his heart and soul into his work, striving to be at the top and help clients make the right choice. His enthusiasm infected everyone around him, and to some extent, he became an invaluable asset to the business. For the businessman and his son, the kind-hearted Roberto was not only an expert in his field, but also a sincere friend. They trusted him, valued his opinion, and could always count on his support. Together, they overcame many difficulties and succeeded in creating a successful and thriving business. At the next family celebration, the young men introduced their parents to each other. Of course, the adults developed a sympathy for each other, but not the kind one might expect. The families began to treat each other warmly, but no more. Senor Cabrera occasionally provided some financial support to the lonely woman, but Sarah often refused it, stating that she preferred to earn a living on her own. Several years passed like this. The young man had already graduated from college. Alonso had landed a job at one of the country's leading IT companies. And Roberto continued to work at Senor Cabrera's car dealership, now as a senior manager. In Alonso's life as an IT specialist, there was a new object of admiration, a female accountant from the company where he worked. Her name was Carolina, and Alonso was simply smitten with her. Their friendship hadn't diminished one bit. The men still enjoyed spending time together, Aunt Sarah still greeted them with a tray of hot pastries, and Senor Cabrera still enjoyed getting out with his boys, as he liked to call them, somewhere. And now, in Alonso's garage, the young men were trying to figure out his car. As it had been from the very beginning of their shared history, without Roberto, the businessman's son couldn't handle breakdowns. And together, it was more fun, faster, and easier. During their work, they encountered an unexpected difficulty. One of the clutch parts needed urgent replacement. Alonso was soon to have an important meeting, and he had no time to go to the service center. So, to get under the car, the men had to use two jacks. The setup looked odd, but they had access to the necessary parts of the car, and that was the main thing. While Roberto searched the workbench for the necessary tool, Alonso was busy removing parts from the car. And then, suddenly, a horrifying crash and a brief, muffled groan rang out. Roberto turned slowly, and before his eyes was a terrible sight. The car had slipped off the jack and fallen right on his friend. "Alonso?" Beto stammered, his voice trembling, before bursting into a cry. "Alonso!" In shock and horror, Beto reacted instantly. He was determined to help his friend. Roberto immediately began to jack up the car again. Yes, the car had already fallen, but they needed to get Alonso out from under the deadly trap. With noticeable confidence, he managed the car. Despite the stress and his own fear, he acted quickly and decisively. Every move was carefully calculated to minimize the risk of further injury. He managed to relieve the pressure of the car on his friend's body, and in the same moment, he pulled him out by the legs. The situation was extremely tense, and every second was critical. Beto, showing exceptional determination and willpower, did everything possible to take care of the injured. Once he managed to free his friend's body, Beto immediately began to administer first aid, trying to ensure the injured man's stable condition until the ambulance arrived. Upon examination, he noticed that Alonso was barely breathing. His breath was wheezy and weak, and there was a serious wound on his head, from which blood flowed in a thin stream. Roberto seated his friend's unconscious body so he wouldn't slip, then quickly loosened his tie and unbuttoned his shirt. After that, he ran to the kitchen, grabbing his phone from the workbench on the way. As he ran, his hand automatically dialed the emergency number. 911, what's your emergency? The car fell. My friend is lying, Roberto muttered tearfully. He's breathing badly, bleeding from his head. He hasn't woken up. What? I don't quite understand. The woman held a brief pause, gathering her thoughts. A car fell on your friend. He's unconscious. And he's having trouble breathing, right? Yes. The jack slipped. The car fell. The woman quickly noted down the address Roberto gave her, then informed him of the approximate time until the ambulance arrived. From the kitchen, he grabbed 2 bags of ice, which he hurriedly carried back to the garage. Beto was racked with guilt and helplessness, feeling he could have done more to prevent this tragedy. His heart was filled with sorrow and fear for his friend's life. He couldn't hold back his tears, realizing that his decisions and actions could have influenced the outcome of events. At the same time, he continued to administer first aid, trying to help his friend hold on until the doctors arrived. He applied the ice packs to his head and, with particular care, to the area on his chest that looked unnaturally pale. Each of his actions was aimed at saving his friend's life and easing their suffering. In difficult moments, such strong emotions can overpower even the most resilient people, but his inner strength and compassion allowed him to act correctly in this critical situation. His mind was overwhelmed with anxiety, fear, and horror, but his hands moved on their own. While he waited for the doctors, Beto called his mother, feeling that she should also know what had happened. And so he wanted to reassure himself, first and foremost. This phone call was a way for the kind-hearted person to support himself in this difficult moment. His mother had been his rock and his friend's support in many tough times, and he knew he could count on her support and understanding in any situation. The woman, though experiencing her own not-so-great feelings, was extremely cautious during the conversation. Her main task was to calm her son, the only person who could make a difference right now, especially in Alonzo's life. She distracted him from the victim's unnatural wheezing, allowing him to assist his friend with a clear head. Soon, the doctors arrived. They checked the man's pulse, examined his head and chest, and then immediately instructed Roberto to help them load him into the car. The kind-hearted man held the stretcher firmly, fearing to accidentally drop it. Though he remained silent, tears continued to flow from his eyes. On the way to the hospital, Roberto remembered Senor Cabrera. He called him, briefly explained the situation, and gave the address of the hospital they were being taken to. Just a second before the call ended, the kind-hearted man heard a loud phrase. "To hell with the meeting, everyone go home. I need to be with my son." At the hospital, the young men were met by Sarah. She had no idea which hospital the boys might be taken to, but she remembered Alonzo's address and simply tried to guess. Tears barely held back, she looked at the condition the man was in. He had paled completely, his skin in places had taken on a bluish hue, and the wound on his head did not bode well. She immediately embraced her son, who never let go of his friend's hand for a moment. Despite her own emotional difficulties, he found the strength to be there for his friend, to give him a sense of support even now, when he was in a deep sleep. At that moment, the kind-hearted man showed not only his strength and determination, but also a deep devotion to his friend, a willingness to go through fire and water with him. "Sir, you cannot accompany us to the operating room," the nurse, fearing the upset, large man in distress, tried to speak to him gently. "Please wait here. The doctor will inform you about the patient's condition." Roberto, still staring at Alonzo's pale face for a few more seconds, finally found the strength to release his grip. The stretcher disappeared behind the heavy doors of the operating room, and he had nothing left to do but wait. At that moment, the door to the department swung open with force. Like a hurricane, a worried businessman appeared in the corridor. His condition wasn't enviable either. From anxiety, he turned gray, and his gaze was full of madness and fear. Where's my boy?" "Ernesto, he's in the operating room," Sarah said quietly, her voice choked with a lump in her throat. "We have to wait, there's nothing else we can do." "What do you mean, nothing else?" The usually calm businessman now seemed like a completely different person, constantly breaking into cries, "And no one told me what's happening to him?" Sarah just shook her head negatively. Immediately after that, a large tear ran down the woman's dry cheek. She hugged her son by the shoulder, and the thought of what he might be feeling right now made her doubly painful. The moment when the surgeon emerged from the operating room was filled with tension and anticipation of results. The eyes of the woman and the man met with the tired but confident eyes of the doctor. He probably knew that he had done something important immediately for all present. "Did you call the ambulance?" A clearly elderly man asked Roberto, "Thank you. Thanks to you, we had someone to save. If you hadn't held ice to his chest, he would have suffocated. And if you hadn't thought to lay him down, the bleeding would have finished him off. And it's good that you sat him down. I don't want to scare you, but in a lying position. Well, in a lying position, he would have just drowned in his blood." After that, the doctor peeled off his glove and extended his hand to the man for a handshake. Beto rose from his seat and stared at the outstretched palm, unsure of what to do. But a gentle touch from his mother on his back suggested what he should do. And Roberto extended his broad hand to the doctor, looking at him confidently and gratefully in the eyes. The moment when the surgeon shook hands with the kind-hearted man was symbolic. Just a minute ago, Roberto had looked at his hands with disgust, believing he was the cause of the tragedy, as he was the one who suggested using the jack. For the young mechanic, this handshake meant more than the doctor thought, as it immediately became clear that his efforts and determination had real significance, and his actions helped save his friend's life. Shock, horror, fear, and panic are natural reactions to danger. And the emotions that poured out from the three individuals at the moment of relief were even more profound. For the mother, it was a moment of immense relief and gratitude for Alonzo's life being saved, who had become like a second son to her. For the businessman, it was a peak of joy and at the same time a deep acknowledgement of the human courage displayed by the seemingly soft-spoken and unhurried Roberto at the right moment. The man flew to Beto and enveloped him in a tight embrace. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," he repeated, as if in a delirium. "I knew you were a good person, son. I knew it. Sarah, oh, Sarah, you raised a hero. Be proud of him. Be proud of him for the rest of your life. Holy Mary, thank you for our boy being alive. Thank you for my boy being there." For the young mechanic who took responsibility for saving his friend, these emotions might have been incomprehensible. In his understanding, helping a friend in a critical situation was a necessity, not something to be endlessly grateful for or praised. He simply did what seemed right at the moment of danger, without considering possible consequences for himself. He just feared losing his friend. This modesty can even be a characteristic trait of a person. Someone accustomed to doing good deeds without expecting praise or gratitude often feels discomfort when faced with such vivid appreciation. Roberto was rightly called special. His kindness was boundless. What his heart was capable of was peculiar to him, and him alone. Nevertheless, it's important to remember that even if the car mechanic doesn't accept thanks, his kindness and willingness to help others remain great qualities to be cherished. "Doctor, wait." Sarah suddenly remembered, "So what about Alonzo? What happens next? Your son was lucky to be a fan of family cars. Unlike praised sports cars, your son's car suspension was high enough not to crush him on the spot. He got away with a decent concussion but a couple of complex rib fractures." The doctor pulled a handkerchief from his coat pocket and wiped his wrinkled forehead. "Ahead of him lies a long period of recovery. Now it will all depend on his body's capabilities. He's a strong lad, so I dare say, looking ahead, Alonzo awaits a long and happy life. Of course, after discharge." During the fall, the car miraculously avoided crushing Alonzo's head. He was fortunate to land in a spot where there was a spacious depression. The car landed on its wheels, and their height was just enough to spare the man's life. But, of course, it wasn't all rosy. The impact was still strong enough to break several ribs. Indeed, it was the suspension that saved him. 2 weeks later, Alonzo was allowed visitors. In the hospital room, he lay in a stiff corset, as any movement could seriously harm him. He weakly smiled at the sight of his loved ones. The concussion still heavily affected him, as did the excruciating pain in his chest. But he didn't complain. On the contrary, he hurried to share how much better he was feeling compared to the first day after the operation. Sarah and Ernesto shared with him the story of the surgeon's handshake. At that moment, Alonzo's face lit up with a broad, grateful smile. "Beto, you're just a guardian angel. Anyone else would have panicked and not known what to do, but not you." After 2 long months, Alonzo was discharged from the hospital. He still had to wear a corset to support his torso, and he was warned about his work in the garage. Lifting weights, especially cars, was prohibited. In light of this, Senor Cabrera decided to throw a small celebration. A whole festivity unfolded in the backyard of his luxurious home. Of course, according to Sarah and Roberto, who had never seen such splendor. Relatives of the Cabrera family, colleagues, and close friends came. Ernesto was having the most fun. He laughed a lot, drank, and even danced. Apparently, the moment when he was close to losing his only son had a strong impact on him, and he decided to rid himself of the image of a stern father. At one point, he approached Roberto on unsteady legs. "Son, you're our hero. You're the hero of this evening." Ernesto slurred, "You saved my little boy. My blood, my Alonso. I know how much you love cars, so right now, get off my property, and come back in an hour with any car from my showroom that you like. It's yours. It's the least I can do to repay you for my son's life." It was difficult for him to take any action. He could refuse, obey, or joke. On the one hand, such a gift was a reward for saving the most valuable thing a person could have, life. On the other hand, such a generous gesture seemed inappropriate to him. He still didn't understand why everyone around was so concerned about saving Alonso. Roberto still sincerely believed that he just did what he was supposed to do in such a dangerous situation. Nevertheless, he decided to go to the same car dealership where he worked. It wasn't the closest to the mansion or the most luxurious, but Roberto knew exactly what cars were in stock. As he was on his way, Beto already knew which car he would take from there. At the dealership, he was greeted by not very friendly colleagues. They had always been like that in his presence. He never thought about the reasons. He just thought they were gloomy and uncommunicative. This happened with many people who didn't like their job or were dissatisfied with something in life. The man quietly walked around the showroom and chose a modest family hatchback for himself. He decided that selecting an expensive model would be too brazen of him. Besides, the model he chose specifically was easy to maintain and had low fuel consumption. When the kind-hearted man announced the purpose of his visit on a day off to the other employees, they laughed. "Have you lost your mind already?" Carmen asked mockingly, "A free car? Seriously? I'll call Senor." "Well, I'll call him then, you can bet on it." The woman forgot what a self-satisfied smirk felt like as the gruff and heavily irritated voice of the boss came through the receiver, confirming Roberto's words. He really was given the right to take absolutely any car straight from the showroom. All present exchanged glances, their eyes expressing the strongest indignation only humans are capable of. Among colleagues, discontent suddenly flared up regarding the privileges enjoyed by the car mechanic. Some speculated that his successes were a result of flattery and personal connections rather than diligence and professionalism. The outrage grew even more when one of the colleagues, a young woman named Eleonora, decided to voice her opinion. "So, you happily and carelessly run after the boss's son, and you get a car for that? I've been circling around him for 3 years, getting up at 5 in the morning to do the best makeup, the best hairstyle, pick the best outfit." Nora didn't stop, stepping towards the perplexed Hulk. "I courted this worm for 3 years, and in the end, got nothing? I could endure when you suddenly got one promotion after another, could endure your appointment as senior manager, a raise in your salary. But a free car, that's too much for an intellectually challenged beggar like you." "She's right. Since when did you become better than us?" Jasper stepped forward. "You can't even string 2 words together. You don't even have education in trade and marketing. You're supposed to work in the auto shop, and now, in the end, you get everything, and we get nothing." The conflict escalated. Employees felt unfairly deprived or undervalued. Roberto felt it necessary to find ways to resolve the scandal and establish dialogue among the employees in a calm manner. "I sell well. I know cars. They trust me." The kind-hearted man defended himself with noticeable agitation in his voice. "They told me to take the car. I came to take it. It's not my fault. Maybe you'll take our salaries too? Get out of here while you're still in one piece." The boss will sober up and forget about his gift. Go. Roberto didn't argue. He felt terrible shame and deep resentment. Was he intellectually challenged? His mother always told him he was just special, not like others. Wasn't that okay? The man understood why his colleagues were so upset, but he couldn't respond to them in any way. Senor Cabrera always told him how much sales had grown with the appearance of the kind-hearted man as a consultant. Buyers, tense at first, would relax after a couple of explanations and attentively listen to what the showroom employee had to say. They often thanked him for the simple explanations. Sometimes he even dissuaded them from buying expensive models in favor of more modest ones, citing expensive repairs or excessively high fuel consumption. Reviews in the service quality section were full of positive comments about the man's work, so he couldn't imagine that his colleagues would be so angry with him. Intellectually challenged beggar like you. This phrase firmly lodged in Roberto's mind. In a subdued mood, he returned to the mansion. His figure quickly slipped into the backyard, trying not to attract attention. He looked tired, saddened, but he tried not to show it. The mother of the man, noticing his subdued state, immediately decided to find out what was wrong. She was genuinely concerned about his emotional well-being. "Son, what happened? Why are you so gloomy?" she asked. "Mom," Beto spoke quietly, his voice tinged with suppressed emotion, "tell me honestly. Am I retarded?" Sarah pursed her lips. She hadn't expected her son to ask this question at his age. She immediately guessed that he hadn't received a warm reception at the car dealership. Now she pondered, should she lie to him or discuss everything like two adults? Sarah took a deep breath and hugged her son. "Roberto, my boy. You do have a developmental delay, it's true. It's all my fault. I didn't take care of myself when I was pregnant. But you shouldn't consider yourself bad or wrong, son. You mustn't forget about your unique abilities and talents, about how you cope with difficulties. Remember your achievements in auto mechanics, your ability to understand cars. And your friendship with Alonso? He values you, respects you, and he's never once said anything about you being defective. You've brought success to Senor Cabrera's business. You're valued as a good employee. You work, you communicate, you've received an education, Beto. Every person is unique, and developmental differences don't define their worth as individuals. Your achievements and personal qualities are much more important than other people's opinions, and you can always count on my support and love. Because you're my son, no matter what the jealous ones say. I'm proud of you, son." Her words became a real source of strength and inspiration for the man. After the conversation with his mother, he felt more confident. He found the strength to overcome the hurt. This helped him return to the celebration and meet everyone present, feeling more confident and happy. Meanwhile, Ernesto stood behind a lush bush of decorative cypress. Despite his intoxicated state, he also noticed Roberto's strange mood. He was about to joke about how he disobeyed the boss and came back on his own, but he caught the complex question that Beto asked his mother. The businessman, burning with curiosity, decided to eavesdrop on their conversation. In the end, touched by the sincerity and sensitivity of the mother's words, the owner of the car dealership couldn't help but react. He stepped out of the shadows to express his feelings and support for his employee. His heart filled with deep respect for the man who, despite his developmental differences, showed resilience and strength of spirit to overcome difficulties and achieve success. Ernesto felt that this man deserved more recognition and respect for his efforts and talents. "Beto, son," the man spoke more soberly, "I couldn't even imagine how difficult it was for you to be a special person and still lead a full, happy life. You're a hero, and not just because of saving our Alonso. And Sarah? Many mothers would hide their child from the world, would hover over him like mother hens. And you simply took him and raised a real man. Kind, selfless, loving this whole world. Come here, before I get too sentimental." Embracing his employee and his mother, the salon owner expressed his sincere support for them. This moment became a symbol of their friendship and mutual respect, as well as confirmation that sincerity and sensitivity always find recognition and respect in the world. After questioning Beto about the incident at the car dealership, the businessman decided to urgently reassess his surroundings. The incident with Roberto opened his eyes to how important it is to have honest, reliable, and sincere people in his team. He was sincerely struck by how wrong he was about his employees. They all smiled when they saw him, were polite to him. But as soon as Ernesto crossed the threshold, they immediately turned into monsters. No wonder the largest number of good reviews came in for Roberto's work. So, the next day, he decided to revise the hiring policy in his company. He realized that students who hadn't yet absorbed the corporate culture and hadn't been tainted by hidden ambitions and selfishness could bring a fresh perspective and new ideas to his business. As for the old employees, Ernesto decided to part ways with them. By demanding the HR department to review the hiring criteria, the businessman expressed his willingness to support and cultivate those in his team who were ready to learn mutual respect and friendliness. This step was not only a gesture of gratitude to his special employee for their work merits, but also the beginning of creating a more ethical work environment in his company. Senor Cabrera understood that offering a job to those struggling to find their calling could not only change their own lives, but also benefit the entire team. By providing such individuals with the opportunity to learn from his best employee, the businessman not only invested in their professional development but also fostered an atmosphere of tolerance and mutual understanding in his company. Learning not only the skill of understanding machines but also the skill of understanding people with their peculiarities is an important aspect of fostering social responsibility within the team. So, did you get the car? Alonso asked, as they sat calmly in the bar a week after the celebration. The man remained silent, only nodding satisfactorily in response to the question. Along with the car, he received something more important. Thanks to Ernesto's efforts, his circle of acquaintances was no longer limited to just Alonso. The new employees turned out to be open to communication, which Roberto was pleased about. Behind the men, the sound of the doorbell rang, and a whole group of people entered the bar. And among them was a lovely girl who smiled at Roberto like she had never smiled at anyone else. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn, Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. but carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.